While spending the summer of 2024 in Alaska, I wanted to see as much of that state and as many of its 8 national parks as I could. I made it to 5 of the 8. Only California has more national parks, 9. One of the parks I realized I could visit was Gates of the Arctic, the northernmost national park in the system, the only one that's located entirely north of the Arctic Circle. In future episodes, I'll be covering those other adventures, but today I'll be talking about my drive up the Dalton Highway towards Gates of the Arctic National Park. I took a few days off my job at Denali National Park and drove north, far north, 250 miles north of Fairbanks, where I had been a few times. First to the tiny town of Coldfoot, population 34, 60 miles north of the Arctic Circle. First, let me explain how really big Alaska is. We so often get the representation of Alaska as a small inset at the bottom of a map, so much so that Alaskans get tired of tourists thinking their state is an island near Hawaii. Yes, it really happens. I guess if they're flying, it really doesn't matter. Many years ago, a friend of my mother's said she was going to Aruba. My mother asked where Aruba was, and her friend replied, "I don't know, we're flying." Later, I got to go to Aruba by boat. It turns out it's an island in the Caribbean. Many times when I told people I had driven to Alaska, they were shocked to learn that I could. No ferries were needed because Alaska actually connects to Canada via the Dalton Highway. At the Arctic Visitors Center, there was a map that showed a better representation of the size of Alaska. I think this is a better map to illustrate the size of the 49th state, and they should be using this in geography textbooks. And for all of its size, there are very few highways and only one rail line in the state. In part, the Dalton Highway serves as the service road for the Alaska Pipeline, and there are many places where the pipeline is visible from the road. Not far from Fairbanks is an exhibit with information about the pipeline. In preparing for my job at Denali, I also had to learn a lot about this amazing feat of engineering that brings 19 or 20 million gallons of oil a day from Prudhoe Bay on the northern edge of Alaska, on the Arctic Ocean, 800 miles south to the port city of Valdez, from which tankers carry the oil to points further south. A statue in Valdez and exhibits in the town's museum also commemorate the work on the pipeline. The pipeline has ingenious passive devices to keep the permafrost from melting. If the permafrost melted, that could cause the pipeline to collapse, and with climate change hitting Alaska especially hard, that could create an environmental disaster. The pipeline is also designed to shift rather than break in an earthquake. In the 2002 Denali quake, which registered 7.9 on the Richter scale, part of the pipeline shifted 14 feet, but thanks to the sliders on which it resides, it didn't break. Emergency shutoffs at intervals along the pipeline did their job and closed off the flow, so even if the pipe broke, very little oil would have spilled. For many hours along my drive, I was alongside the pipeline. I didn't need maps or directions. There's only one road in this part of Alaska, and the road was bad and got worse beyond Coldfoot. This map shows the road from Fairbanks to Dead Horse. Dead Horse doesn't sound like the most welcoming place, and I didn't make it that far north. The drive from Fairbanks to Coldfoot was supposed to be 6 hours, but given the long waits for one-lane traffic around construction zones, and that I would get stuck behind slow-moving trucks, and that other times wasn't able to drive anything close to the speed limit given the horrible road conditions, the drive took 9.5 hours. They were tiring hours in that I didn't dare relax even for a moment. I had to be vigilant for potholes that could rip my car apart, and I had to be alert for wildlife. I almost killed a marmot and a few squirrels who really need to learn to look before crossing the street. The grizzly I saw was ambling across the road about 100 yards ahead of me, but when he saw me, he broke into a run and got off the road well in advance of my arrival. I slowed and looked for him in the bushes in hopes of a photo, but he was gone. I did see a moose off to the side of the road. On the drive back, I saw a lump of fur by the side of the road. From the size and shape, I was guessing it was a bear cub who failed to make it across, but I didn't stop to examine it closely to make sure. There were several construction zones where traffic would have to wait while vehicles coming the other way used the one lane available. At one of the stops, while we waited to have our turn on the one-lane road, the man driving the pickup truck in front of me, which had a wide load banner on the back, came back and told me that when we started moving, I could go ahead of him and the semi with the oversized load and the warning car that preceded it, since they would be going very slow. We chatted a while, him standing in the cold, blowing rain to talk. He asked where I was from and where I was going, and he asked if I knew the rules of the Dalton Highway. I had read in several places, including on the long sign in a gas station, that large trucks were given priority on the road. I don't know if this is the law or just protocol that passenger cars are supposed to pull as far to the right as possible and stop to allow the big trucks to pass. The driver of the pickup truck said that it not only was the way the road was supposed to work, but if I failed to comply, I could expect to be run off the road. He said this kindly as a warning, not as a threat. When I did pull over for semi-trucks, most of the time the drivers would wave in thanks. It did feel at times like I was yielding to an ambulance or a fire truck, but luckily I was in no hurry, and there was only a large vehicle about every 15 minutes or so it didn't seem too inconvenient. And a few times while I was stopped, I noticed something worth photographing, so I was glad I had a moment to stop and enjoy the scenery. There were lots of big trucks carrying oversized loads, including pieces of pipe, building materials, and road construction equipment. About half the truck drivers waved in thanks when I pulled over, and at one point I saw a road grader going back and forth on a narrow bridge, so I waited well back from the end of the bridge until he seemed to finish whatever he was doing, then I slowly drove forward. The equipment operator raised 2 fingers to his forehead, and what I took as a salute of thanks for my giving him the space and time to work. In addition to being a nice guy, I also, out of self-preservation, wanted not to risk my car or my life playing chicken with a road grader on a narrow bridge. A few times my car got splashed by a passing vehicle, and the windshield and hood were coated with muck as though someone had thrown a bucket of chocolate soup at me. I am sure a passing truck at close range or with any speed up would have made that ordeal worse. At times the road was just a construction site of mud, and I was glad I had some other vehicle to follow, or I would not have known where to go in this goopy track. At one point, the truck in front of me straddled a ridge of muck and rock. The truck had enough ground clearance to do that, but I knew I would get high-centered if I attempted that, so I put 2 tires on the right ridge of the road and drove the length of that small muddy mountain at a rather steep angle, leaning left, but it worked. I crossed some familiar rivers, and some with names I had not heard before, and some that had no names. At almost every place I stopped, I saw discarded plastic bottles, many with yellow liquid in them. Apparently, since there are so few rest stops along the road, some truckers will use a bottle and throw it out the window rather than stop. I chose to stop and visit a bush if I had to. I also saw many cigarette butts littering the road wherever I stopped. This land is so untouched by humans, it seems a shame to see such trash invade it. I made it to the Arctic Circle and had to stop for a few photos, although it's not like there's a giant line painted on the ground at that spot. Although the exact location varies a little from year to year, the Arctic Circle is 60 degrees, 33 minutes north of the equator. It is the southernmost latitude at which the sun does not rise on the winter solstice and the sun does not set on the summer solstice. Only 4% of the Earth is above this imaginary line. After crossing that point, I kept heading north to the town of Coldfoot, where I was going to stay so I could visit Gates of the Arctic National Park. Those are adventures I will cover in the next adventure of Walt's Wanderings. Subscribe so you don't miss it.